Recording in progress, and it's 10:15, and welcome to Third Sunday Forum. My name is Carrie Ostby. Just a couple housekeeping things. I said a little bit about wonky microphone a little bit earlier. If you are welcome to take your coffee cup upstairs if you would like some more coffee after this. If not, feel free to put your empty coffee cup on the trolley in the back by the door so I can go right back to the kitchen and doesn't have to take an extra trip upstairs and down. Other than that, I think I said earlier, I am monitoring chat and everything on the phone and letting people in if they're joining us on Zoom. So I swear I'm present as I'm watching my phone in the corner. Other than that, I'd like to introduce today and welcome Reverend Michelle Hargrave, who is the River Valley Superintendent for the Methodist Church here in Minnesota, and to join us today to let us know more and talk about the historic General Conference that took place earlier this spring. So I'm going to turn it over, and I think Reverend Hargrave, you mentioned we'll have some time for questions during the session. So I'll try and monitor chat for questions as well as bring the microphone around and repeat questions when we need to. We have a few more people joining us, but I'll let you get started.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you. And I'm sorry that I'm not with you in person, but really glad that we have this option so that we can talk about the historic General Conference that just happened. And talk about that together. I have my remarks divided into kind of three sections, and then at the end, I'll list all the extra things that happened. And I think we'll have opportunity to just check in and see if we have questions as we move through those three pieces. As we settle in this morning for this time of conversation, let me offer a word of prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this beautiful day, for Father's Day, and we give you thanks for the United Methodist Church. As we gather to hear more about what has been moving and changing in the church, we pray that you would give us your wisdom and your grace and continue to give us the hope that you are at work in this church, that you have plans for the future of this church, and that we can participate with you in leading the United Methodist Church forward as it continues to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, it is good to be with you. And let's see now. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. Let's see if we can get that to go right there. So our general conference happened at the end of April and just into the beginning of May. And this was technically the 2020 general conference, which Minnesota was supposed to host, but we've had a lot of things going on in the last few years, haven't we? So it was put off multiple times, and then finally, due to scheduling issues, needed to be moved to North Carolina. So we didn't get to host this one. I was sorry about that, but we had a good delegation that went to General Conference, and lots of people went to visit for a few days at a time. I went as an alternate delegate in 1996, so I got to see how the whole thing works. And then I went as a visitor in 2019 because I wanted to see what happened then. I didn't go this time because we needed to have some superintendents home to mind the shop here in Minnesota, but this would have been one to go to for sure. So there are three major items that people told us to watch out for as we went to this general conference, and they called it the 3 R's, major movements to happen at this general conference. And the first one was regionalization. The church has been trying to move towards a more regional polity for several years, and with stops and starts, it finally came to fruition. And then the second major thing that changed was the revised social principles. That may not seem like a big deal, but there's an awful lot tucked in there. So it was a very big deal. And then removal of the harmful language for LGBTQ persons in the Book of Discipline, of which there was quite a bit. So let's see how General Conference did on these three major issues. So regionalization is one of the major goals that people had at this General Conference. And I know that in order to get there, there needed to be lots and lots of work with the United States delegates and delegates from the global church, from around the world, because this plan is a way to shift the power of the United Methodist Church into, we've been a very United States centric denomination, but our membership is shifting so that the United States is not going to be the largest membership category. So we need to reorganize our polity, because the United States should not be making all the decisions for Africa. Africa should not be making all the decisions for us. The Philippines and the European churches just have some different ways that they need to live out their ministry. So this passed, the move towards regionalization passed at General Conference. But since this is a constitutional amendment, it will need to be approved by 2/3 of all of the 2025 annual conferences around the world. And so every vote at those annual conferences will be aggregated. So it isn't like if Minnesota votes 2/3, then that passes as one. It's Minnesota votes and Iowa votes and Kenya votes and the Philippines votes, and all of the votes around the world need to come to 2/3 to be able to pass this and make this happen. It will do a couple of things. We're going to rename the central conferences that we have right now, which are the African regions, Europe, and the Philippines. And they're going to be named regions instead of central conferences. Now, this is important because in the United Methodist Church, we have a very racist history of central conferences. In the United States, in the middle of the 20th century, all of the Black churches in our denomination were put into a central conference, which was a way to keep all of the African-American churches and leaders separate from the white churches. And it is that was only undone in 1968 when the merger happened with the EUB Church. So I think about that. I was 3 years old before that happened. So this is a piece of our history that we have been working to repent from. And so we're removing the word central conferences from the vocabulary, and regions will be a better word to use. And then the United States becomes a region as well. And so there'll be some parts of the Book of Discipline that each of these regions will be able to change, and then some that they will not. So each region will be able to alter their Book of Discipline. I mean, so right now it's one book, and the stuff in this book fits for everyone, although some of the regions currently do alter some of the pieces, and because this is a very United States centric book. And so this will give everyone the opportunity to shape it more for themselves. So things like the specific criteria for ordained and licensed ministry, criteria for lay ministries and admission of lay members, and the ways that the regional, annual, district, and charge conferences are organized, that might shift a little bit. And also different hymnals then could be created with different rituals, and certain pieces of the judicial administration will be able to be tailored to either like the United States or Africa, the Philippines, or Europe. But there are things that will not be able to be amended. So in the Book of Discipline, basically the whole beginning of the Book of Discipline, if you've ever looked at this very exciting book, there's a whole first section is stuff that we hold in common and will not be changed. Our Constitution, the General Book of Discipline, which is just a piece of it, our doctrinal standards, our theological task, the ministry of all Christians, and our social principles. Let's see. So it'll be important for, let's see here. I don't know. Can you see me yet, or did I mess something up there? Okay, hi. So by moving to the regionalization, we're going to be able to really acknowledge that the United States part of the United Methodist Church is a little bit separate from those other parts of the world, give more autonomy where appropriate to the different areas around the world. Some ways that we can be distinct, but then there's certain pieces that we'll be holding together. So it'll change the way that we use our book of discipline. The very first beginning, it's the first section. All of this part will stay the same, and then the back parts will be able to be edited. So I just wonder if you have any questions or anything you want to lift up about that.
Anyone got a question? I think I'm going to try to bring the microphone back. So everyone can hear.
It's hard when I'm not in the room. I can't really see if you're completely bored or if this was interesting or not. This is actually very, very interesting for what it's going to enable the church to do, but it probably seems a little dry. So
I've got a question. This is all newer for me, but I'm wondering, as we're kind of going into creating these regions, how much thought has gone into like the country, the Philippines and their government and the ability to carry out a lot of these principles? And, you know, I'm just kind of wondering, politics plays a part. And
well,
the freedom to be able to truly follow that, but yet you live in a country where there's a lot of oppression.
I think, one of the things that we're aware of is as the United States part of the church really wants to move towards being inclusive, asking African and Filipino churches to do that with the kind of government structures that they have and the cultural dimensions there is very difficult. And so it's really astonishing that the votes all went the way they did this last general conference. The church wanted to hold together, I think. But being able to create regions will allow the United States to move in its sense of human rights at a little bit different pace than I think some of the other regions. Is that kind of what you're referring to? I mean, you're right. The different parts of the world, there are parts of Africa where it's illegal to be homosexual. And then the United Methodist Church in the whole world has just shifted its position. So regionalization will give the churches a little bit more cover to remain United Methodist.
I've got another question.
I think it's hard for laity, especially who have never been to General Conference, to recognize in the old model of conferences, we were spending in the General Conference sessions probably 80% of the time on United States issues, pensions for pastors, qualifications, and all those things that are very cultural in essence. The pension process doesn't impact the African conferences, and so we were asking all these delegates from these various conferences outside the United States to sit through hours and hours and hours in General Conference, where nothing we were talking about was going to impact them. Mm-hmm. And so it's a regionalization idea that was developing 10 years ago in various sectors has just finally come to pass.
Mm-hmm. I recognize Eileen Williams' voice there, right?
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very important that, we've been so US centric that General Conference has taken up so much time on our issues. And this will allow us, when we come together as the whole world of the United Methodist Church, to do our common work together. And then each of the areas can focus on the things that pertain to them. Is there one more question on or comment on this part?
My name is Ryan, and I went to the Stewartville United Methodist when I was a child. And, you know, went to other Methodist churches as well too, here in Rochester. With some of them being, you know, more conservative and some of them being more inclusive and some of them, you know, being, you know, kind of in the middle. Kind of stuck where they don't know which way they side on, you know, social issues and stuff like that. And with the trust clause that's in place, will this regionalization allow each region to, whether if they want to keep that in place or get rid of it entirely? Or is that gonna be, or does that have to be, go through like a constitutional amendment? Like in the regionalization to allow the regional part of the denomination decide whether they want to keep the trust clause or just get rid of it? And make it easier for churches who wish to exit the denomination gracefully, instead of having, you know, to go through the, you know, the legal court system and all that mumbo jumbo.
That's a good question. I think, I don't know where in the Book of Discipline the trust clause lives, but I know that the process of disaffiliation that was created was not a constitutional amendment. That was created in 2019, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. It was paragraph 2553, which created that disaffiliation option. It's not going to be retained in the Book of Discipline, but it's not constitutional. So I do think the regions probably could create processes, and there are processes for right now for the central conferences to be able to disaffiliate as they need to. But the current process that we've had for disaffiliation in the last couple of years has been sunsetted. It's ended. And it isn't coming back. So I'll move on to the next couple sections, and I think maybe your question will be answered there. So let's see here. The next piece that was kind of a really big deal. Oops. Sorry. I pushed the wrong button. All right, is revising the social principles. Now, the social principles, our social creed has been around since the 1920s in the United Methodist Church. We've been really on the forefront of the social gospel. I believe that, you know, we've had presidents who have taken part of their agenda from what the Methodist Church was saying as social issues in the 20s. So we've had a really big role to play in our country as to how we stand on social issues. But the social principles, which is in the beginning of the Book of Discipline and is also available as a pamphlet, was put together in 1972. And it's been edited. Every general conference pokes around at it, but it's never been completely reworked and rewritten. And so they had an opportunity to have a revised social principles, completely redone. And so there were some important changes that were made there. First time in 52 years, it's been completely rewritten. It went from 6 to 4 major sections, from 76 to 51 subsections. I taught a class a couple of years ago on this, and there's so much in the social principles. I couldn't get through it in 1 year, meeting weekly. And now it's being rewritten as a global document and not a United States focused document, because before it was really, there was like all the United States stuff and then a global section. And then it's been shifted now, and thousands of people participated in the rewriting of it all around the world. So there's 4 sections: community of all creation, the economic community, the social community, and the political community. Some of the pieces of inclusion that we have been watching in the last several years were located in the social principles, which is an odd place to legislate the behavior of the church. These are supposed to be study guides and things to help us learn, and not used as kind of punitive legislation. But they've been reworked now. Let's see. So now the next section that I want to look at is the removal of harmful language. And that's really the big piece that I think that the media and many of us were watching for at this general conference. The regionalization and the change in the social principles were some pieces that lay some of the groundwork for this to happen, or actually all three of these pieces work together. And so if any one of them had changed, then it was going to shift the position of the church to some degree. But what happened at the general conference a couple of months ago was all of it changed. And it was just astonishing how that happened. On May 1st, the removal of harmful language regarding ministry by LGBTQ clergy was removed by a 93.14% vote. That was 692 people voting for to 51 against on the consent calendar. And the phrase self-avowed practicing homosexual was removed. Now, the powerful thing about that, and I think, you know, one of the questions I was asked is what was the tone of this general conference? What happened, but also how was it different? That issue has been fought over in the United Methodist Church for 52 years. And every time I've gone to general conference, it has been incredibly heated. In 2019, it was heartbreaking. But it passed with a almost 93% vote on the consent calendar, which means it was just a list of many other items that were set that they didn't even expect to fight over. A consent calendar is the part of legislation where the committees say, well, we approve this. We don't think we need to argue about it. We're not going to debate it on the floor. And so we'll just pass all of those things in one swoop. We do it at our annual conference, and we pass things like, you know, the pensions and years of service and just some of the kind of boring things. But this momentous vote happened that way in the consent calendar. I think it was on a Tuesday morning, and I was watching, and I was just floored. I just thought, did that just happen? Was that just real? It's astonishing. And that, I think, as much as anything, indicates the shift that happened at this general conference, is that the church was able to come to such clarity and such unity on the issues that we've been fighting over for more than 50 years. So there's let's see here. Several other things happened as well with that. Current slide. All right. This was the vote. Someone took a screenshot of the vote as it happened. It was, I mean, it was just shocking that to so many of us that it happened that way. Other things that happened is that clergy rights to officiate or not officiate and church rights to host or not host any wedding were approved. And DSs and bishops may not punish those decisions. So clergy can now officiate at same-sex weddings, and churches can host them without fear of reprisal or from the district superintendents or the bishops. And as I've been reminding our traditional churches, clergy can say that they do not want to officiate at a wedding. So some of our churches that you named, the gentleman named, you know, that have, you raised up that there are people that have different perspectives. I've been reminding our more traditional churches that you can choose who you want to marry and who you don't want to marry. But I am asking my pastors, if somebody comes to you and asks you to do a same-sex wedding and you aren't comfortable, please send them to a church that will, such as Christ Church in Rochester. So I think this is a way that we can work together and be in ministry together and honor people. The bishop keeps lifting up, let's do no harm first. But you can see here, DSs and bishops cannot punish pastors. So in the weeks after General Conference, I spent time with some of my more traditional churches and said, you have the right to make those decisions, and I may not punish you for that. And that's important to respect that. So, you know, we're trying, just as the gentleman lifted up, we're in relationship in the United Methodist Church and in the Minnesota Annual Conference with people with a variety of perspectives. And the challenge is, can we be in ministry together? Can we be one church together? That's what we're working on. Prohibitions against funding anything related to LGBTQ ministries were struck down, and now funding is encouraged to make sure to not restrict. I have too many negatives in there. Funding anything that refuses to support ministry to LGBTQ persons is now discouraged. So like if the United Methodist Church wanted to do any kind of ministry with HIV, AIDS ministries, we had to be very careful not to ever give any money to anything that was supporting approving LGBTQ life. And now it's saying you can't discriminate. I did a New Church Start in the 90s that was started as a reconciling ministry. And this was one of the issues. The church was giving money to start a church that was LGBTQ friendly, and that was a conflict. So now that position has just been completely turned around. So those are some of the really major pieces that happened in those 3 R's. I have another list of things that I'll bring up of some other issues that happened, but the regionalization, the revised social principles, and partly some of that is taking out all of the harmful language in the social principles, and then all the harmful language that was in the Book of Discipline against LGBTQ persons has now been removed. It's not a boldly supportive document now, I don't think, although I did see that support for non-binary persons was now added in the list of groups of people that should be protected. So that's a positive step, but it's sort of brought to a point where the Book of Discipline is no longer a harmful document for LGBTQ siblings. So we'll pause there for just a minute. I do have another little section that I'll run through, but is any of this that you want to talk about?
No, we have some questions. I'm bringing the microphone over. You can hold the mic together. It will stay on. Yeah.
Michelle, and question, it's more of an opinion, as you.
I would expect
With-
nothing less, Gary.
It's your opinion, I want. It's not mine, but question.
Okay.
And the question is, with the removal of the LGBTQ harmful language, was that one of the main impediments, or one of the main reasons for the number of the conservative churches to leave that particular type of language? Or were there other types of concerns of persons wanting to have more power in the local denomination that also contributed not only that language, but what are some other aspects that brought about the dissolving or breaking away? And but also with that breakaway, how much healthier the general conference was?
So in Minnesota, 8% of our churches disaffiliated, which was really, we're sad to see anybody go and glad that it wasn't more. And that was good for Minnesota. Around the country, it was about 30%. As Bishop Lynette came to Minnesota, she was very clear that paragraph 2553, which is the disaffiliation paragraph from the 2019 Special General Conference, stated that you could only disaffiliate over issues of sexuality. Only. So there were churches, and I have heard them speak, who said, well, we want, to pay less apportionments. We want to have more freedom. We want, some doctrinal issues. And so I think early on in the disaffiliation process, there may have been churches that left that way, but near the end, Bishop Lynette was communicating quite clearly that the issue is around human sexuality. And that's what the disaffiliations needed to be about. That's what the legislation was written as. And it was written by the people who put together the traditional plan as a way to encourage the progressive churches to leave. It just didn't end up being used that way very much. So, and Gary, I think I mean, I think, what do you say, the proof is in the pudding. We went through this huge loss of 30% of our churches across the United States. And when I went to General Conference in 2019, it was painful. I mean, not just because people didn't vote the way I wanted them to. It was so divisive. It was just divisive and difficult. And you would go to worship and then, and be moved, and then the debate would start, and you would think, how can this be happening in the same room? The mood was so difficult. And what I hear about this General Conference and what we can see from what happened is that there was much more of a common spirit, of a gracious spirit. And what I'm seeing in the church now is a willingness to work across the differences. So like as a district superintendent in a district that has a variety of perspectives, as we heard earlier today, how do we continue to be the church together? So it really, the mood has shifted in a powerful way, Gary.
You have another question?
Another question I have is, how does, someone in the hierarchy of the church, when they appoint a pastor to a church, what would happen in the case, like, say, a liberal congregation or progressive congregation gets assigned a conservative pastor, and a conservative congregation gets assigned a more progressive pastor? What happens in that case if that does not work out?
Well, that means the cabinet did not do a good job. Absolutely. So I think there's some advantages to the place that we're in. What I've been telling my churches is the appointment process is very consultative. It's becoming more consultative than it used to be. And we're now in a season which is new, where our clergy who are LGBTQ do not have to be closeted. I have one friend who came out publicly on TV in an interview the week of General Conference, never had done that publicly before. I know we still have clergy who are closeted, but if the clergy don't have to be closeted, then it'll be easier for me to know what they need in a church, and easier for me to do a good job putting them in a place where they can have fruitful ministry. I think as we can bring these conversations kind of into the light, it will make us a healthier church so we can do a healthier job. What I say when I make appointments is we always try to bring the best available missional match. And so that means of all the people that are available, that's an important piece as we do ministry, who is the best and who is a missional match. And what you're talking about is a missional match. So a traditional church is going to have a difficult experience if we send a gay progressive pastor to them. And a gay progressive pastor is going to have a hard time there. And a traditional pastor is going to be frustrated in a progressive church. So we try to really pay attention to that. And I have a lot of conversations with both clergy and churches as we're making appointments. I hope that as we can become more open, it will help us do a better job.
Another question is has there been talks about abandoning the appointment process and letting individual churches call their own pastors to kind of like, how some similar like-minded denominations, they do more of where the congregation calls their own ministers and, and everything like that. Has that been a thought on the whole going through a general conference and everything like that too for some congregations?
I think that the whole church would admit that the appointment process is not working as well as it used to. There's just too many cultural factors that have shifted that. I mean, it was set up as a pretty patriarchal system where you have a man who can move and his wife stays home and supports him. And once you start shifting away from that model, it's pretty tricky. So there's definitely a lot of stress in the appointment system. But as I work with judicatory leaders from other denominations, I can tell you that one advantage of the appointment system is that we are very effective in getting our clergy to work and getting our church's clergy. We're much more quick. I mean, so next Sunday will be pretty much the one Sunday of the year where several churches who are in transition won't have a pastor. Today, most of those churches are saying goodbye to their pastor, and on the 30th, most of them will be welcoming their pastor. Few churches will have a couple weeks. There are many denominations that take a year or two to find a pastor. So there's still some advantages to it, but it is stressed. I'm not hearing any conversation about undoing appointments at this point. And I don't know what my job would be if we didn't do appointments, but you are right. It is under stress. The system is struggling. I have one more section of things that I wanted to highlight that other changes that are happening because of the things that happened at General Conference that I want to let you know about. So, okay, so this was an item of great joy. Our deacons were given sacramental privileges. In the past, deacons were very limited on what parts of the communion liturgy they could say and what they could say during baptism. Like they can hold the water, but they couldn't say the baptismal words. That was changed. And so deacons who serve our churches in a variety of ways were given the sacramental privileges to serve communion and to perform baptisms. And that begins January 1st. Oh, the restrictions on LGBTQ persons, that all took place at the beginning of May. Everything else pretty much happens in 2025. There'll be a reduction in the number of our bishops. I believe the North Central jurisdiction goes from 9 to 5. There's a few retirements planned. The West and East Ohio conferences just merged. So, but I think the jurisdiction was hoping that we would have 6 bishops, and it was reduced to 5. And we don't know exactly what that looks like or how that's going to go. I've been asking a lot of questions, and it seems like Minnesota isn't going to be affected by this, but we are able to share with the rest of the jurisdiction what it's like to share a bishop with the Dakotas. And we've had a good experience with that. Our conferences are going to be apportioned but around 38 to 41% less than they were in 2016. The budget has been cut by that much for the general church. That means that the services that we get from the general church will also be reduced, but this will be more in alignment. You think about 30% of the churches disaffiliating. This is a reasonable number. We entered into full communion with the Episcopal Church. I think that vote happened when our Bishop Lynette, was leading the General Conference during her session. So let's see, a couple more things. Oh, I'm sure you're thrilled. There's a new clergy retirement plan. Gary, you can be glad you don't have to deal with the changing retirement plans, but they just they keep changing quite a bit. So Westpath is our agency that works on this new plan. The condemned racial, ethnic, and gender-based violence against our Asian American Pacific Islanders community. Each annual conference is going to be required to name a creation caretaker. So of all these really big things that happen, there's these other pieces, these threads of work that the church is doing, trying to lift up the issue of creation care and just what a crisis that is. And so this is just a piece of the step that comes there. There was an apology that was read at General Conference for clergy sexual misconduct. And that apology has been read at each annual conference this year. So it's the first time that the church as a whole has apologized for the effect of clergy sexual misconduct upon our churches. And then to your question about disaffiliations, paragraph 2553 was removed, and it will never be printed in a book of discipline. Disaffiliation is no longer an option. That has sunsetted, and it was not renewed. And so the rest of us who are together need to learn to figure out how to work together. That's the work that we're doing. And we really just had a lot of changes in tone, as I've said. Here's just some pictures of some of our folks from Minnesota, and this one up here in the upper left, I think, is after the vote to remove the harmful language. It was a different kind of general conference, and everyone who was there has been talking about that. I went to my district superintendent training at Lake Junaluska last summer. I'd been serving since January, and Wu Jae Im and I went and traveled and were trained to be district superintendents with people from all over the country. It was just an amazing experience. But when we were there, I remember at one point just looking around and thinking, this is maybe the first time I've been in a room of United Methodist leaders on a national setting where everyone in the room has decided to stay. Everyone has decided to remain part of the United Methodist Church. And it shifted the tone at that particular gathering. And that was before General Conference, before disaffiliations were done. And I heard about the pain from different conferences about how many disaffiliations they had and how hard that process was. But it's a different experience to be in the room when everyone there has chosen to stay. I think that's what we saw at General Conference. And that's what we're living into in Minnesota as well. Okay, here we are. We're all going pretty much the same direction. There's some differences and some differences of opinion that we can care for with each other, but we're pretty much going the same direction. And so it is a different moment in the church, and it'll be very interesting to see how God moves through that, through us. Now, I know that this movement of General Conference really comes into alignment with where the Minnesota Annual Conference declared that it wanted to be in 2019, and comes into alignment with where Christ Church in Rochester has been for quite some time. You've really been a leader in the forefront of stating where the church needs to be, and have done that beautifully and graciously. So it is exciting to have more of our church who I know, people like that have spoken here, Gary Lewick and Eileen Williams, have worked on these things for a long, long time. This is it's an exciting moment. Do you have any final questions about any of these items?
I'm also going to ask if people at home want to unmute and do it manually. If you have questions, I tried to watch the chat and haven't seen anything. Is there anyone? Hold on a second for your info. I'll be right back.
Would you explain what full communion with the Episcopal Church means?
I didn't hear you very well. What does the full communion with the
Could you
Episcopal
explain
Church
what
mean?
full communion with the Episcopal Church means?
It means that we're able to appoint pastors back and forth. It means that we've done the work to be clear that we have a deep agreement on major doctrinal pieces and ways that we operate. So it just, we have, we work to have good relationships with a variety of denominations, but so I think we have full communion with the ELCA, and the Episcopal Church, and then a few others. It just kind of affords, it's a statement of not complete unity, but of commitment and relationship, and then it affords us the ability to send clergy back and forth through our systems a little more easily.
I'd like to ask about our general church agencies, and can the disaffiliated churches access services from them?
I didn't quite catch you, Eileen.
Okay, well, for instance, the Board of Discipleship, can disaffiliated churches access services from the Board of Discipleship or other general agencies?
Yeah, I think that they can. There also was legislation passed for each conference needs to be prepared to graciously receive any churches that want to come back. So I think that the whole church recognizes that it's sort of like in a divorce. In some divorces, there's a season where it's difficult. It's a difficult relationship and awkward, and eventually you have to go to your kids' weddings. And sometimes you can get into a better place of connection. I think that there's a sense that, it's an awkward relationship with the GMC right now. The hope is that will shift in the future.
Do you have any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any, let me just double check, I didn't see anything pop up online.
Thank you for your time today and for your interest in these larger matters. You know, your church has been, you know, setting the standard and doing beautiful ministry. So sometimes we can just say, well, we don't need to worry about what the rest of the church is doing. But it sure is nice when there's some alignment between all of our systems. And it's an exciting moment in the church. And I'm glad to be in ministry with you at Christ Church in Rochester. Thank you.
All right, thank you for joining us today.